there's a good chance your horse has gut damage right now. And the thing causing it isn't on any ingredient label. Most owners who go looking for answers end up on some list of bad feeds to avoid, swap out their grain bag, and figure they've handled it. But the research tells a different story, and it's a lot more interesting than a shopping list. Because in almost every case, the feed itself isn't the villain. The villain is the how, the when, and the how much. And there's a part of your horse's gut where all of that damage quietly accumulates that most owners don't even know exists. That's what this video is actually about. 7 things you're feeding every day, and the hidden mechanism behind why each one can slowly wreck the gut. Not because the feed is toxic, but because of the pattern around it. I've dug into the research on this, and by the end, you're going to have a completely different mental picture of how your horse's digestive system works. The last thing on this list is the one that ties everything together, and once you hear it, the whole picture clicks into place. Let's start with something almost nobody explains correctly. Your horse's stomach secretes hydrochloric acid continuously, not just when food arrives, but around the clock, whether the stomach is full or completely empty. In humans, acid production is triggered by eating. Horses evolved as trickle feeders, eating slowly but more or less continuously over most of the day, so their digestive systems are geared for that. The stomach works like an acid pump that runs whether or not the horse is being fed. In the wild, that's fine. Under natural circumstances, horses graze up to 18 hours a day, which means there's almost always forage in the stomach, and the saliva produced by all that chewing is constantly buffering the acid. But in a barn on 2 or 3 meals a day, there are long stretches where that pump is running with nothing to buffer it. Since feed helps buffer stomach acid, long fasting periods are a real problem. The equine stomach empties approximately every 6 hours, so ideally fresh forage should be available at least that often. So here's the reframe that changes everything. The most damaging thing you feed your horse might actually be the nothing between meals, the empty stomach, the gap. That's the real villain, and it makes every other item on this list make a lot more sense. Now the second thing, and this is the mechanism almost nobody explains clearly. Grain does not require as much chewing, so not much saliva is produced to buffer stomach acid. That sounds simple, but think about what it actually means. Unlike the lower glandular portion of the stomach, the upper half of the equine stomach does not have a bicarbonate-rich mucus layer. The only protection that portion of the stomach has from gastric acid comes from saliva production and the buffering capacity of feed. So when you pour grain into the bucket, you're delivering a starch load that ramps up acid production, while simultaneously removing the horse's primary defense against it. The chewing is what makes the saliva. Less chewing means less saliva. Less saliva means less protection. One scoop of grain does both of those things at once, and most owners only think about the energy side of the equation. And there's a third thing. This one is the one that almost nobody in the horse world talks about, and I want you to hold on to it because it's going to matter a lot more later. For years, gastric ulcers, lesions in a horse's stomach, were the only gastrointestinal ulcers anyone talked about. But in more recent years, veterinarians and researchers have grown increasingly aware of the presence and potential impact of ulcerations affecting the equine colon. The hindgut, and here's the gut punch. Hindgut or colonic ulcers are located further down the digestive tract in the colon of the horse, and they're more common in horses already suffering from gastric ulcers. So a horse dealing with stomach issues is also quietly at risk downstream, in a part of the gut that a standard endoscope can't even reach. Your vet can scope the stomach. The hindgut is a completely different situation, far more invasive to examine, which means this damage is largely invisible until it becomes a much bigger problem. Keep that in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to it. The fourth thing, and this one flips most people's mental picture of their horse's digestive system completely upside down. Extensive research and modern treatments have emphasized equine gastric ulcers in recent years. But in reality, a horse's stomach makes up less than 10% of the equine digestive tract's total volume. The hindgut, the cecum and colon, includes the largest structures in the entire gastrointestinal tract, and these structures house the population of beneficial bacteria responsible for digesting fiber, the primary energy source in the equine diet. This fermentation process can provide up to 70% of a horse's energy requirements. So we obsess over the tiny stomach and largely ignore the enormous fermentation system downstream, the one that's actually doing most of the work, and the one that everyday feeding choices can quietly destroy. Which brings us to the fifth thing, and this is where it gets genuinely alarming. Starches are typically broken down and digested by enzymes in the small intestine. But when large amounts of grain are fed in a short period of time, not all of the starch gets digested there. It gets transported to the large intestine instead. When starch ferments in the large intestine, it increases the production of lactic acid and changes the microbial population of the hindgut. Starch fermentation produces lactic acid, which lowers the pH of the hindgut. Acid-sensitive bacteria that make up the normal intestinal microbiome die. These dead bacteria release endotoxins, which compromise the lining of the intestine, and the intestinal wall becomes leaky, allowing endotoxins, inflammatory mediators, and bacteria to be absorbed into the horse's bloodstream, potentially resulting in laminitis. That's not a hypothetical worst case. Horses with hindgut acidosis often have frequent low-grade colic that is never well explained. The symptoms overlap with gastric ulcers, so owners treat the stomach and wonder why the horse never fully comes right. The real problem is two organs downstream, and the everyday grain scoop is the trigger. Now remember that open question I left earlier. The hindgut damage that's invisible to diagnosis? This is why it matters so much. It is entirely possible that grain-based feeding patterns are a primary culprit, leading first to hindgut acidosis, then colonic ulcers, then ultimately to colic. And most of the time, nobody connects those dots. So what's the actual threshold? That's the sixth thing. And this is the number most horse owners have genuinely never heard. Current recommendations suggest limiting starch and sugar intake to less than 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. For a 500 kilogram horse, that works out to no more than roughly 1,000 grams of starch per day total, and the per meal limit is about half that. The reason the per meal limit matters even more than the daily total is that the small intestine can only process so much starch at once. Pile it all into 2 big meals and you're almost guaranteed to overflow into the hindgut. Split the exact same daily amount across 3 or 4 smaller meals at roughly 6-hour intervals, and you dramatically reduce the starch hitting the gut at any one time. The feed doesn't change, the pattern does, and that difference alone can change everything downstream. Run your own horse's numbers with your vet or a qualified equine nutritionist. Starch tolerance varies depending on metabolic conditions, workload, and individual horses, and any significant diet change should be done gradually. Sudden changes in feed are themselves a colic risk, but knowing that number exists and that most people have never thought about it is already a big step. The seventh thing is the one that makes people wince a little, because it's so specific and so easy to get backwards. Consider feeding your horse a small hay meal before each ride. Acid can splash up into the squamous area of the stomach during exercise, and a layer of feed helps prevent this. Exercise has been shown to compress the stomach and increase hydrochloric acid production. This compression and movement can cause gastric acids to splash out of the protected glandular region of the stomach and into the unprotected squamous region. The upper or squamous region is far more sensitive to sloshing acid, making it prone to ulceration. So the fix is oddly counterintuitive. A small amount of forage, hay or chaff, fed about 30 minutes before you ride, creates a physical fiber mat on top of the stomach contents. Alfalfa pellets don't provide the same protective layer that alfalfa hay or chaff does, which is believed to prevent splashing of acidic gastric contents on the sensitive squamous lining. The long stem fiber is what forms the mat. Grain before work doesn't do that, and an empty stomach before work is the worst option of all, which actually sets up the bonus piece of this, because it's one of the most useful and least talked about specifics in equine nutrition. Alfalfa's high calcium and protein content buffers stomach acid, and clinical studies have demonstrated reduced gastric ulcer severity scores in horses fed alfalfa compared to those on grass hay alone. In the early 1980s, researchers showed that the cell walls of alfalfa plants have a much higher buffering capacity than the cell walls of either timothy or oats when titrated with hydrochloric acid. So a small amount of alfalfa alongside concentrates isn't just adding calories. It's actively working against the acid problem that the grain is creating. Most avoid these feeds videos never include that nuance, and it's a genuinely useful tool once you understand the chemistry behind it. One more thing worth knowing, and this one pushes back against some popular advice in the horse world. While high-starch diets are a known risk factor for squamous ulcers, low-starch diets appear to have a limited effect on prevention. Cutting starch helps, but buying the low-sugar bag doesn't undo the deeper problem. An empty stomach is still an empty stomach. Too little forage is still too little forage. The just switch to low-starch advice is well-intentioned, but it doesn't fix the pattern, and the pattern is what's actually doing the damage. And that's the thing all 7 of these points have in common. Every single one of them comes back to the same mistake wearing a different costume. Horses evolved as trickle feeders, eating slowly but more or less continuously over most of the day. Intermittent feedings, stall confinement, and heavy training schedules are not beyond industry norms, but recognizing that these practices are far from natural equine behavior is pivotal. We took an animal designed to graze for the better part of a day and put it on human meal times. 2 or 3 big grain-heavy meals with long empty gaps in between. And almost every gut problem that follows, the stomach ulcers, the hindgut acidosis, the low-grade colics that never quite resolve, traces back to that one structural mismatch. The fix when you lay it all out is actually pretty clear. More forage, more frequently, smaller concentrate meals spread across the day, a handful of hay or chaff before you ride, a starch-per-meal number that you've actually calculated for your horse's weight with your vet's input, and a little alfalfa alongside the grain if your horse is a good candidate. None of that is complicated, it's just a different pattern. If this changed the way you think about your horse's gut, drop a comment below. Tell me which one surprised you most. I'm genuinely curious whether it's the hindgut piece, the saliva mechanism, or the exercise acid splash that catches people off guard. And if you've got a friend who's been treating their horse for ulcers for months without full resolution, send them this video. Because there's a good chance nobody has ever explained the hindgut side of the equation to them. There's a video coming up next that goes deeper into how to actually structure your horse's feeding schedule around these principles. The timing, the amounts, and what to do if you're working with limited turnout or stall rest. Click that one now, because the information in this video only gets more useful when you know how to apply it day to day.